begin in the name of Allah and ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family members and his companions and all those who follow his legacy till the day of judgment, praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. Continuing with our concluding session number 5, titled
Internal Methods of Repression.
Internal Methods of Repression. How Israel controls, not the narrative, you said controls
Its population and the people it has control over in one way or another that are inside its internationally recognized borders and inside the borders that it exercises effective control over, which at this point includes parts of Lebanon, part of Syria, and who knows, more to come.
More to come.
Tune in next time.
Tune in next season of Greater Israel.
Yes.
So the first session was nationalism in general.
Yes.
Then secular Zionism.
Labor Zionism, secular Zionism.
Yes. And then religious Zionism.
Yes.
And then the fourth was
the lobby.
The lobby.
Because the lobby is the greatest external measure of control. And today we're talking a little bit, because it's impossible to cover all of this in one lecture, like some of the internal methods of control. Because really having internal methods of control is foundational to the whole state. Having a very interlayered sort of geography of control for all of its minorities is something that Israel has found indispensable and that they've worked towards ever since really the first few settlements were established. And there's so much to cover, I just can't talk about it all. Like, I can give out readings if people are interested about the security state or technology or the universities or histories of the Palestinians within Israel or outside of Israel. And today I thought we'd mostly focus on, first off, the way that the state relates to the concept of democracy, the way in which the state uses land and demographics to control, and a little bit about the parallel legal regimes that its people are subject to.
Okay. No, Jazakallah khair. No, we really appreciate your time through these last 5 sessions. And if I had to summarize, I guess the structure for all of it is how Israel came to be and continues to exist.
Yeah, how it is and why and what it will be.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Okay, so...
you have to apologize for this first slide, Haroun.
I apologize. I'm very sorry for subjecting you to all this. So, the only democracy in the Middle East. Stop me if you've heard that one before. It's new to everybody. I know. I'm sorry for bringing in these new advanced concepts at the end of everything, but sometimes we gotta dive into the heavy stuff. Does this fit Israel? Yes and no. Let's talk about why that is. Please, next slide. So, why is it necessarily a good thing that it's a democracy? Because you can imagine a democracy made up of Nile crocodiles, and a population of water buffalo would kind of be predisposed to dislike it. It comes down to the idea of legitimacy, international legitimacy. Modern theories of what does it mean for a state to be legitimate, to be a real state, to be a state that other states can shake hands with, do business with, rest on what's called the consent of the governed and popular sovereignty, meaning that people are okay with what you're doing and you do more or less what people want in one way or another. The government is invested with power by the people and they're going along with it. And the most common way this is done is by democratic election. By voting in democratic elections, people are choosing the governing class from among themselves. But again, we can't talk about that before you ask again. So what does it mean? Who are the people in this case? And in this case, they're the nation, the ethnic, the religious, the linguistic, or whatever combination group that is invested with legitimacy because it's recognized by the state, and that invests the state with legitimacy. It's like a loop. One feeds the other, which feeds the one, which feeds the other. And we talked about this in lecture 1. So these people who vote are saying, I am represented through this. I get self-determination. I get to have a say in what happens to me and what the people who are like me do in power and with their power. But the trappings of democracy, elections and the ability to vote, suffrage, they're not quite enough to really confer that because, next slide please, because Belarus has elections and suffrage, but nobody thinks it's a democracy. It's a little more complex than that. So let's talk about some of the things that make Israel a kind of democracy. The most obvious, next slide please. The most obvious issue with the idea...
Sorry, if you just I'm not familiar with Belarus and what's going on.
Oh, yes. So this shows the areas that are under Israeli control.
The slide before with Belarus on it?
Oh, that's Belarus. So that was an image of like the election percentage that Alexander Lukashenko, who's been in power in Belarus ever since Belarus was no longer a Soviet satellite. He's been in power. So that's like 35 years now, something like that. And that shows like the percentages he won in different districts. And obviously nobody actually believes those elections.
It's very popular. That's the
sure. He's very popular for 35 years. Oh. Extremely popular.
It's a good track record.
Yeah, I mean, he's an amateur compared to some people. I mean,
he only had 80%. That's
I know.
horrible.
I know. Like, what did Hafez al-Assad used to get? Like 99.5%?
Who's rookie numbers compared to Hosni Mubarak.
Who are the 0.5%? Bring them to me. Okay, so the most obvious issue with the idea of Israel being a democracy is Israel like governs a large number of people with varying degrees of coercion, a lot of whom have no say whatsoever in how they're governed. And these people are the Palestinians who live outside of its internationally recognized borders, the ones who live in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. And as I said before, now this also includes certain people who live in Syria, in Quneitra, and in some of that surrounding province. But there's degrees to that. It doesn't include like the 1948 Palestinians, who are calling it the people who were not expelled for varying reasons. Next slide, please. These people have like varying say in at least their local governance, but there's degrees to that as well.
In the sense that they can vote.
Yeah, they can vote and they have certain rights. I think this is also something that comes up a lot. It's like people in Israel, even if they're from these minority communities that are securitized and subject to all these different kinds of control, they have a lot of like individual rights as long as you project loyalty and you're not in the way of the state in some fashion. These rights can be revoked at almost any time, and increasingly are, especially now that the people who, for example, even post support for a stop to the genocide, like the person on the next slide, if you could. Like this is an image of a teacher from, I forget where exactly, but in the Galilee, and she was arrested because she posted expressed sympathy for people of Gaza in a Facebook post. So, these rights can get revoked at almost any time, and they increasingly are by the even more Kahanist security service of Israel. But as a Palestinian, a 48 Palestinian, you have rights, and your legal compact with the state exists, but it's a lot less elastic than the legal compact the state has with anyone who is Jewish, like the person on the next slide. That's a picture of a young Bezalel Smotrich who, now, there was a time, Bezalel Smotrich, I've mentioned him a lot of times, that he's like the arch settler person, and at this point he was arrested because he had a lot of gasoline. He was going to blow up a highway to protest the disengagement from Gaza, which happened in 2005. And he was arrested, and he was kept in jail for something like 3 weeks, and he was released. And now he's in the government, so you can make it too if you're a Jew. What you don't have as a 48 Palestinian is any real form of collective rights. And that's not only just for Palestinians, but anyone who's not an Israeli Jew. You don't have collective rights of self-determination. And this includes a disenfranchisement of the many Druze and Circassian Muslim communities and other Christian communities that exist in Israel to this day. These people have these communities have a lot of individuals who've achieved rather highly, like the people on the next slide. The person on the left is Ghassan Alian. He is a Druze. His name is Arab, as you heard in my pronunciation. And he is the IDF general who's in charge of the West Bank and Gaza. He's the head of what they call the coordinator of government actions in the territories. And the person on the right is Ayub Kara, and he was a lawmaker for Likud. He was in several Knessets and several governing coalitions.
And they're both Druze.
They're both Druze, yes. They're both Druze. And there have even been people who are Arab Muslims who have been even in labor, in the Labor Party. I don't think there have been any Arab Muslims in Likud. And the point is these people are well integrated. And at the same time, even though they're well integrated and they represent themselves, all of their political expression occurs within the Jewish Zionist framework. And this distinction escapes a lot of people. If you're a 48 Palestinian, you can be pretty accomplished on an individual basis. There is one 48 Palestinian who is a Supreme Court judge. There are a lot of doctors who are 48 Palestinians. I think they're overrepresented in the medical field relative to their population. Although that has a lot to do with the fact that they're barred from a lot of tech jobs because they don't serve in the army. And any tech job that has to do with surveillance, you need a security clearance for it. So because they don't serve in the army, they don't get a security clearance. So they're kind of channeled to things like the medical field. So you can be a business owner, but the point is their Knesset votes don't really matter. And that's because of the demographic engineering. And anytime you really can express yourself politically, it's only under this totally alien framework which is imposed by invaders. The objection here is not to like popular sovereignty as such. You know, obviously Islamic viewpoints of legitimacy don't line up perfectly with popular sovereignty, but the objection is that this is an engineered majority disenfranchising a native minority. That's what it is. And they're open about it. Next slide, if you please. Zionist luminaries like this gentleman, who I will not pollute the masjid with his visage for very long, David Friedman, explained his willingness, like his proposal to end the conflict in his book, One Jewish State, said that it wouldn't really matter if you gave West Bank Palestinians local voting rights because it would have no effect on Israeli Jewish politics or Zionist politics. It doesn't really matter if they can vote for like the mayor of Jenin or whatever, and he can like change how he collects the sewage. That doesn't have any problem with them. What would matter, and this cannot be allowed, is collective political expression.
So ensuring that whatever political expression they have is powerless.
Yeah, like the political expression they have is ultimately not really significant. It serves a symbolic purpose at most. In a way, kind of serves the purpose of the Israeli Jews in that it makes them seem more open and cosmopolitan and willing to extend rights than they actually are. The one time that a party was in a governing coalition, he got out of that was Ram in a coalition with Naftali Bennett as prime minister, and he got into that coalition because he promised he wouldn't bring up anything about the West Bank or anything like that. And the result of it was he got a lot of promises about funding for Arab municipalities and certain reforms, recognizing some villages, connecting them up to electricity, specifically Bedouin villages in the Naqab. But then actually that never went anywhere, and the subsequent government reversed all those gains. So it doesn't really have any actual effect. It has a symbolic effect.
It's just a show for the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yes, next slide. So in so much as you combine popular sovereignty, popular with majoritarian democracy, meaning that over 50% of your citizens liking something usually means it translates into policy, then you need a shared ideology to bring people together. And here that is, of course, Zionism, Yishuv Eretz Israel, and all that entails. The effect then is that the elections will always legitimate the will of the specific group. The part of the reason that many people are pro-Palestinian, say that Israel is not legitimate, is this exact reason. Israeli Jews exercise control over a population with no recourse, with no rights, and with no sovereignty. Those people are subjects, not citizens, and people don't think it's legitimate for a state to have subjects anymore. Even the citizens who are non-Jews are not able to fully pursue their right of self-determination. The nation-state law passed in 2019 states, bluntly, that Israel provides self-determination solely to Jews. And in its own way, this is just like putting in words what everyone knows is true anyway. Ben-Gurion and the labor establishment and their allies, which is everyone else, made sure this was true with the expulsion of the Palestinians from 1947 until, and this is true, up and through the early 1950s. It ended with an 80-20 split in citizenry, which has been largely maintained to this day. And it could be assured that there's no chance that even a well-organized minority really do anything enough to have any effect. So if political expression is vested in one community that sits at the top of a kind of racialized hierarchy, what kind of democracy is that? Next slide, please.
So the 80-20 split, that's with citizenry?
Yeah, with citizenry.
But then in terms of just occupation of the land?
In terms of like pure like river to the sea counts. So it's, at this point, Israeli Jews, including settlers and everybody else, are like a bare majority, according to statistics that were collected in 2022 by the Israeli census as well by the PCPSR. It's something like 46 or 47. I forget exactly where it is because obviously there's other populations, but at this point they're a bare majority.
So we established earlier when we were talking before that math's not my strong point.
Yes.
But that would end up resulting into, the bottom line is, regardless of the math, millions of people who are subjects, essentially.
Yes, like something like 5 odd million people who are subjects, plus
vote,
however many people live in Quneitra and places like that. They can't vote, or the people they can vote for have no control over what actually happens, and they are, ordered hither and yon by this great unaccountable force.
Is there any other nation in the world that has this going on?
Obviously there are other nations which are countries that nobody likes that do sort of thing. There are no other countries that have this sort of first world, enlightened, Western, democratic labels applied to it that have this exact situation. In his book, One Jewish State, David Friedman, the person who, you don't have to go back one slide because I think we've seen enough of his face. Please don't. No, please don't. Good. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, so he tries to make a comparison between Puerto Rico, but people from Puerto Rico can move because they can't vote in certain elections. People from Puerto Rico, but they can move here and do that. Like if you live in Puerto Rico, you can't vote in those elections, but you can move to New York anytime you want. You're a citizen, and as soon as you move here, you can vote for anyone you want. And under his framework, you couldn't have 1,000 people from Jenin could not just move to Tel Aviv and vote for Tel Aviv mayor and member of Knesset and stuff like that. So it's not there's no analogous group. Anyway, so what kind of democracy is this? Next slide, please. Political scientists call it a Haroun democracy, a full democracy for the superior group, quote unquote. This is the proper term for Israel. And yes, so this is the flag of Rhodesia. Rhodesia is an example of a Haroun democracy. It was a state that existed in what is now Zimbabwe, and it was a state in which officially anyone could vote, but they had certain targets that you had to have a certain amount of money, a certain amount of land, a certain amount of other things, such that almost no black people at all could vote, even though black people made up 95% of the population. Obviously, Israel does not do things in this extremely crude fashion. They tend to do things with a sort of plausible deniability, but this is an example of a Haroun democracy. Other examples include the Confederate States of America, and also the early United States, frankly.
It's not a good list to be on.
No, not exactly. There are other people who use other terms like ethnocracy, but I feel like it's a distinction without a difference. There's arguments about what that includes and what it doesn't. I don't think those are really useful distinctions. Huh?
What about theocracy?
A theocracy, Israel's not a theocracy. If there's a Motzes Gedolei HaTorah that can told people what they could and couldn't turn on in Shabbat, then that would be a theocracy. Iran is a theocracy because depending on who is actually making decisions, because the state is theoretically run by the Rahbari, who is a religious figure, and technically he can make all sorts of orders, and there's all these other clerical hierarchies that determine who can do what. The papal states are a theocracy, but Israel is not a theocracy until the Haredim get 62 seats in government. Okay, so in any event, of the many, many ways this particular Haroun democracy suppresses its native population, the most obvious is through land, the foundation of economics, the foundation of politics, and the foundation of sovereignty itself. Next slide, if you would. So, let's talk land again, unfortunately. We discussed this previously, I think, in the second lecture. 93% of land in Israel is owned by nobody. I know this is changing now with certain liberalization, but I'm going off what is more or less the accepted way they do things. It's a national trust. It's administered by the state. You can lease it for 49 years or for 98 years. And some of this land that they acquired was bought during the Yishuv period from absentee landlords, like the famous Sursock purchases. What you see on the map there is the Sursock purchases, which are a series of purchases that were made by the Yishuv from an absentee Christian Beiruti family, a family of merchants that had been awarded the land by the Ottomani government for reasons unknown. And they purchased this land, and it enabled them to make a kind of contiguous settlement there in that very important and fertile area. So it was a very bad thing. The Yishuv used this, and a lot of it also, unfortunately, was bought from smallholders who wanted to sell. So and some of it was like taken through all different forms of subterfuge, but a lot of it was actually like the land that they used to build a lot of their early settlements was purchased, and this is an unfortunate reality. Their mechanism of buying land was to make contiguous settlements, settlements that shared a border that you could travel to through a shared road. And that was in order to establish a real kind of pre-state institution. In order to like make, to build up infrastructure, to build up, roads, sewage, water piping, all of that, you need basically be able to like get in a car and drive from X place to Y place. That's very important. All of that had to be purchased and done. And perhaps, then of course after that, obviously they didn't buy all of it. They bought a very minuscule amount of it, some of the important parts, but perhaps 2 million or more dunhams, which is a measure of land, which I think, if I remember right, it corresponds roughly to an acre, but it's possibly a little more, a little less, I forgot honestly, was directly stolen from Palestinians after they were ethnically cleansed by a set of laws after the Nakba, like the absentee property law, which is a very famous one that was passed in 1950. And some was a Mawat land, which uncultivated land, which was owned by the Ottomani state technically because of their laws, and then when the British took over, they inherited it, they took it, and then of course that was inherited, quote unquote, by Israel after they took over from the British. A total of 2 bodies administer this land. Next slide, please. One of them is a state body called the Israel Land Administration. That is their That's actually an image from a LinkedIn listing they have. So if anyone's interested in managing the Israel Land Administration, I encourage you to apply. Accepting applications now.
I do not.
So some applications may be rejected. And on the left side, you see one of the collection boxes from the Jewish National Fund, Keren Kayemet Israel, and
this is the ones you said are in every Jewish home.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't conducted a survey, but they're very, very common, and we had one, and I remember putting coins into it. So, before I knew
you're undoing it now.
Yeah, Allah accept.
I mean.
So the Jewish National Fund was started during settlement times, and its purpose was to acquire land for Jews exclusively. A lot of the land it acquired was peripheral land that was used to form rings around the settlements. And these days, a lot of it is like national parks and nature reserves, quote unquote, stuff like that. Forests that they planted of non-native trees that keep going up in flames. That's a very great, potent metaphor, honestly.
I've always wondered about that. What's the wisdom here?
They want to make it look European, and they're easy to plant, but it doesn't actually. There's a lot you could go into that.
As opposed to cultivating native plants.
Yes. Why would you do that? You don't want it to look native. The people who founded the state wanted it to be a European state in every way possible. Golda Meir, one of the prime ministers, said, "God forbid that Israel should be a Middle Eastern state. Israel has to be a European state." So, it's about 13% of the land in Israel proper is owned by the Jewish National Fund, administered by it. And until very recently, until 2009, non-Jews were simply barred from leasing it, specifically. And that's part of the reason that I think it was independent from the state, technically independent, because one of the things that Israel does a lot is it has a lot of these sort of quasi-state bodies that do things with that enable them to have a sort of plausible deniability. The state's not doing this. It's the Jewish National Fund. We don't control the Jewish National Fund. It's the same thing with IPAC. IPAC is doing this thing. We don't control IPAC. Wink, wink, like that. And so, if you were a Jew, you couldn't lease this land at all. Now you can lease it, but if you're a Palestinian Arab and you try to lease it, there were studies that show that your permits are slowed, even if you have the monetary resources to do it. A lot of bureaucratic mechanisms are used to slow things down, and there actually have been literally investigations by the Knesset. So imagine you're investigated by Congress because you leased some land. That's the equivalent of what happens. And it's
to a Palestinian.
Yeah, to a Palestinian. A Palestinian Arab who lives there, who is a citizen. And, that sort of thing scares people off from even trying to do it, because why would you want to subject yourself to that? To the sort of hate and lynch mobs and things that do happen, that do gather outside people's houses. And even if you manage to lease the land, then what happens is the state transfers more land to the JNF. Because the state has a lot of land, obviously, through the Israel Land Administration. So the JNF is always administering at least 13%. no matter what, unrestricted land access cannot be allowed, because the more land the Palestinian community, either inside or outside Israel itself, has influence on, the greater likelihood that it can develop itself, and there is no greater threat. Oh, I forgot to ask you to change that one. That's all right. And okay, can you go 2 slides forward, please? So, the development strategy of on the left, let me tell you what this is, though. On the left side, I think it's to your left. On the left side, those are the areas in like Israel proper, which are the Arabic-speaking communities. So the little green areas are places where people predominantly speak Arabic. There's more of them in the south also, but we're only talking about the north today, because the south is like just mostly those are Bedouins. And on the right side is a map of the Galilee, which is in the northern part of Israel, and it shows places where Arabs live and places where Jews live. The places that are yellow are where Jews live. So the development strategy of the Israeli government is such that it prizes continuity and contiguity for one group. I don't have to say which group it is, and breaking up the little other group into little enclaves as often as possible, and you can see that on the map. If you look up a map of where 48 Palestinians and where Jews live in Israel, you're going to see it's really segregated. It's like segregated in a way that even like a New Yorker, and we live in a very segregated city, mind you, like it would make us raise an eyebrow or 2 maybe. Many cities have a significant 48 Palestinian population, but it's really quite significant how much of the country is really barred to them in one way or another. For example, a lot of like the small towns, like 1,500, 1,000, whatever, they admit new residents through what are called admissions committees. And those admissions committees can deny applicants on any basis they want. Like, oh, well, you're not compatible with the character of this area. Everyone knows what that means. Like, you don't have to have it spelled out. It's very obvious what that means. So obviously, Palestinian Arabs are not welcome. In this way, 48 Palestinians are excluded from living a lot of Israel, and the parts where they live in, look at the map. First off, the lands that are designated as Arab, that they can develop on, build houses on, whatever, are very often surrounded by Jewish settlements. There's not a lot of Arab territorial contiguity. One of the first big campaigns in land use was called the Judaization of the Galilee. And that was a project that was undertaken in the 1960s. It wasn't exactly a success, but it did add a bunch of settlements in the areas that are now the Galilee. For example, Nof HaGalil, Nazareth Elite, several others. And those places are almost entirely just inhabited by Jews only. And there's also a campaign like that in the Naqab. They do the exact same thing in the West Bank. They have settlements, and they sort of spread the settlements all around the places where more Palestinians live, so that you're breaking off, you're making it so they're fragmented, so that the Palestinian Arabs don't have a way to easily move back and forth between different areas where the majority of those people live. Everyone knows it's easier to eat small chunks of meat than large chunks on the bone. And of course,
the first part was about the political repression, and this is now they can't even physically connect.
Yeah, that's the whole point of this. It's about like breaking up the areas where they live in, so that physical connection becomes difficult, impossible, or some intermediate position between those two.
And this is exactly what the wall is about.
Yeah, the wall is about that as well. It's
no
about
contiguous Arab.
No contiguity, because if you see like a lot of those areas which are majority Arab speaking, border the West Bank. So there was more contiguity now there's less because of the wall, and because there's no because of the wall you can't easily go from the West Bank into Israel proper. Even if you have an admissions permit, you have to come through one of the specific checkpoints that allows you access. So the state of the West Bank in particular, example of, is this not supposed to be there? Sorry, give me a second. That's probably not supposed to be there. Yeah, so skip past that. That's not supposed to be there. So let's begin by looking at the Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem to examine something of what the occupation means for them. Go 2 slides forward, please.
And these would be citizens of Israel?
Yeah, these would be citizens. No, they wouldn't. People who live in East Jerusalem are not citizens of Israel.
These are not people who are considered...
No, they're residents. They're residents of East Jerusalem. They're permitted to apply for citizenship in a strictly legal sense, but most of their applications are denied, the ones who make them. And a lot of, because remember, East Jerusalem used to be under the rule of Jordan, and it was not conquered in the initial 1948 campaigns. The Arab Legion held it. And because the Arab Legion held it, a lot of the people who were living there grew affiliated with the Palestinian National Project. They weren't subject to all the things that Palestinians who lived inside Israel were, such as the military government and the curfews. So there was more of a connection developed with the external Palestinian national movement. So even when they were permitted to apply for citizenship, most of them didn't. And even the ones who did apply, a lot of them didn't get it. They have admission, they have residence certificates, they have residence permits for East Jerusalem specifically. So and if they leave East Jerusalem, if they go to the West Bank, they lose their residency. In any event, so let's begin by looking at the Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem to talk about what does the occupation mean for them. So Israel conquered East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War from Jordan, and they annexed it immediately. They said, Jerusalem is our internal undivided capital, so we're annexing this, and we don't care who doesn't like it. And this annexation is not recognized by the international community. They went ahead with it anyway. Something being recognized by the international community is so meaningless as to not even be worth mentioning at this point. Palestinians East Jerusalem, like I said, do not have citizenship. They have what are called residency permits. They have to stay there. They have to live there. Even if the only apartment they can find is ancient and not renovated because they don't give out renovation permits or building permits. And they have to stay there. If they leave, they can lose their residency permits, and then they wouldn't be allowed to move back and live in there again. There are active efforts at this time to remove many of the Palestinians from Jerusalem itself by making it impossible or difficult for them to develop. As everyone knows at this point, Israel uses building permits as a means of stalling development. Jewish building permits are expedited. Palestinian building permits are denied or ignored. Occasionally you can get one through bribery, actually. I've heard stories like that. Similarly, Israel treats property claims by Kukist settler organizations as true by default. So if a settler organization claims that, your house, go two forward, actually. Go two forward and then one back. Everyone remembers this video, right?
Yeah.
This is a very famous video.
Yaakov, everyone knows his name. He's a New Yorker.
What's his name again?
Yaakov, no?
Yeah, Yaakov, whatever. If I don't steal it, someone else will. So, the settler organization just claim, we have this record that proves that your house was supposed to be owned by Jews because they bought it in 1943 or whatever, but they didn't move there. And then they just yeah, of course, we agree with you. That is correct. So in that case, unless extreme amounts of media and national attention, which is no longer really a deterrent, but it kind of used to be, unless that falls on a particular case, then you're going to get kicked out of your house and those people will move inside. New construction is usually done for Jews. The Palestinians of East Jerusalem have less access to water, they have less access to land, they have less access to employment, all of these things. However, this is a fate better than Palestinians who live in the West Bank proper, who must obtain permits from COGAT, the Coordinator of Government Activities in the territories, headed by your friend and mine, Ghassan Alian. It's an Arab name. He must be our friend, right?
He has to be.
Yeah, to visit Al-Aqsa, and are very often not permitted to visit at all. Can you go back one slide, please? Thank you. So on this slide, you can see the difference between different kinds of citizenships. So if you're in Israel proper, you can have full citizenship for Jews and Arabs, but citizenship can be revoked for crimes of treason, espionage, and terrorism. There have been cases of Arab Israelis, quote unquote, stripped of their citizenship. East Jerusalem people can live and work in Israel and have social benefits and vote in local elections, but they have to stay in East Jerusalem as their primary place of residence. And 14,000 permits have been revoked since 1967. Whereas the West Bank and Gaza, if you want to enter or work in Israel proper, which many of them used to, then you need to have a permit from the Israeli military in order to do that. Okay, please move forward 2 slides. Okay, so this map shows the designations of the areas in the West Bank under the Oslo Accords. Very briefly, the Oslo Accords were a set of agreements between the Palestinian Liberation Organization, headed by Yasser Arafat, now called the Palestinian Authority, and the government of Israel at the time, which was headed by Yitzhak Rabin, who was later assassinated who was assassinated for making these promises and then other promises. They designate the area of the West Bank into one of three categories. Those categories are here as Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A is mostly the developed and built up Palestinian cities in the West Bank. So, Jenin, Tulqara, Qalqaliya, Nablus, Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, and Al Khalil. The Sivab says Haroun, it's Al Khalil. And also Area B. So, and it does include some countryside Area A, but a lot of it is more developed areas. Area B is under the map, this calls joint Israeli-Palestinian control, meaning that Palestinians are in charge of things like, sewage, and Israelis are in charge of shooting you in the face. So the Israeli security control. Area C is under full Israeli control, and a lot of people live there, and they're in a pretty bad situation.
Even Area A, are the Palestinians in charge of security and everything, or just
technically yes. There's a Palestinian police forces, there's a Palestinian security forces, there's a Palestinian Mohammad, because no offense, but come on, that's like the first thing Arabs set up. Like, if the Arabs,
is it a government without mukhabarat? Isn't that how government works?
At this point, I think
you never took an Arab civics class, Haroun?
Honestly, I think at this point, if you have like a kebab, if like a chain of kebab shops, it probably has a mukhabarat in there. Like, no offense, but
none taken. We take pride in our mukhabarat.
There's a Palestinian mukhabarat. There's a Palestinian all this other stuff, and yeah, they operate in Area A, and they also do joint operations with the IDF. Great, sign up for the Palestinian security forces. Fight alongside the IDF. That must be attractive to somebody. I don't know who. Next slide, please. Anyway, so the Palestinian Authority was originally supposed to be gradually conferred ownership of all these lands. That obviously didn't happen. This is a picture of the famous handshake between Benjamin Netanyahu and Yasser Arafat. I probably shouldn't leave that on for very long. So it was this process of transferring the control was gradually undermined, and then more and more so by the Netanyahu government in 1996. And this process continued on and off until like now, when it's basically doesn't really even exist. And Area C, next slide please, just to get this off the screen. Area C is mostly like rural areas, mind you. Like, a lot of it is countryside. In the normal situation, like, it would be where if you're in Jenin, you would drive into some areas of Area C and you'd buy olives and eggplants and stuff like that. It's, in the normal situation, it would feed the surrounding cities. That is not what happens now. So Palestinians in Area C are governed by Israeli military law. I don't think I have to tell you why that's a bad thing, but basically, so if you commit a crime, like an actual crime, or if you're said to have committed a crime, then you're tried in an Israeli military court. They have like a 95% conviction rate, and they are permitted to use torture. Again, none of this is very good. Is
that how a lot of people, they don't understand it? They say, so what? So military court, what does that mean for the Palestinians?
What it means is that you're going to get convicted of whatever it is the IDF says you did or didn't do. Like, it's just going to happen. Like, that will happen, barring very unusual circumstances. Nobody would stake their life. Like, would you stake like 5 years of your life on a 95 to 5% chance? Of course you wouldn't. And yet, like, just getting up and existing for them, existing in a place where other people, like the Hilltop Youth or any other settler group wants, is risking that. So yeah, the Palestinians who you see on the internet, like, having their homes burned down, their livestock stolen, their water supplies destroyed, just being shot on camera, which did happen. Like, that's one thing that, like, a person took a video of the person shooting him. That person, by the way, did not go to jail, because why would he? And there's another one recently where settlers gouged out the eyes of some of the sheep that are owned by Palestinians. All this happens in Area C.
And this is under the pretense of what? The settlers will say this is a threat to our security?
There's a bunch of different justifications they use. Price tag, so that's something that they say wherein, like, if something happens, like if it is said that, like, a person got attacked by some Palestinians in some place, then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna go just drive into, like, whatever little rural place that's nearby us, and we'll just, like, beat up a bunch of people and burn out a bunch of stuff and graffiti up with, like, Mat L'Aravim and things like that. They call that price tag. Other times they say, well, there's encroachment. there's one thing which I want to reference later, but there's one thing where when they keep burning down olive trees and stuff like that, where they say, oh, these are Hamas olive trees. Hamas plants the olive trees and pays people to cultivate them so that they can use them for cover when they're shooting at settlements. Yeah, that's an actual thing. That
now we have Hamas olive trees. That's a new one.
It's not. I mean, it gets to a point. But yeah, all that stuff happens in Area C. All this Israeli settlements and outposts, which are like extra legal settlements. These days they're frequently legalized. Those are all in Area C. Israel has full power over building permits in Area C. So about 2 to 5% of Palestinian building permits are accepted. And that includes doing things like renovating your own house. Like you can't renovate your own house because you won't be allowed to do it. And then if you do that, they'll come and break your house and you won't be allowed to rebuild it, or you'll have to demolish it yourself. Because if they demolish your house, they send you a bill. In Area B, which appears on this map as well, Palestinians are subject to Israeli military orders, so they can declare a place a closed military zone and tell you to leave. They can declare a place a firing range and tell you to leave. They can designate a place a national park and tell you to leave.
That's where they use the people's houses as outposts and.
Yeah, so that does happen in Area B. And there are no settlements in Area B, but there are settlements around Area B. If you look at this map, you'll see the settlements just all over the place, and they circle things and hem things in for the same reason, the same purposes I've mentioned.
We'll have to stop for Maghrib.
Yes, inshallah. So I'll pick back up with Al-Khalil. So I'm going to mention something about Al-Khalil after Maghrib, inshallah.
We'll wrap up, inshallah, afterwards. So we'll just ask for the brothers immediately after the salah, if you can just pray your sunnah on this side. So we'll start, inshallah, immediately after the salah. So we just ask that everybody pray their sunnah on the side or in the back, because we will start immediately, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله. استووا استقيموا واعتدلوا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. وقال الشيطان لما قضي الأمر إن الله وعدكم وعد الحق ووعدتكم فأخلفتكم وما كان لي عليكم من سلطان إلا أن دعوتكم فاستجبتم لي فلا تلوموني ولوموا أنفسكم ما أنا بمصرخكم وما أنتم بمصرخي إني كفرت بما أشركتمون من قبل إني كفرت بما أشركتمون من قبل إن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. وأدخل الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها بإذن ربهم تحيتهم فيها سلام. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما واخفض لهما جناح الذل من الرحمة وقل رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا ربكم أعلم بما في نفوسكم إن تكونوا صالحين فإنه كان للأوابين غفورا. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. We'll be resuming our class, inshallah, in just about 1 minute. We'll be wrapping up in just a few minutes. So we just request that everyone who's going to pray sunnah to pray on this side or in the back, because we'll be starting, inshallah, in exactly 1 minute. Jazakumullah khairan. You want me to give one? You put me in a very precarious position. I got it. Okay.
Yes,
yeah, please.
23. Maybe on slide 23. Yeah, that's here. Slow down. I write horrendous. You have no. I have one before we.
All right. Interesting. Finish this. No, we're on this.
I was about Al-Khali on the side. That's why I said the slide.
All right. Bismillah wa salatu salam ala Rasulullah. So we just finished speaking about the division of
23
areas. The division of areas in the West Bank, areas A, B, and C, and the difference between them and how Israel administers the Palestinians and deals with them therein.
Yes. And we're on slide 23. You can see a map of Al-Khalil. I can't hear you.
Is this the slide? This is it.
That's the right one. Yeah, that's the correct one. Okay, sorry, I don't know why I'm referencing slide numbers then. So yeah, this is a map of Al-Khalil, the situation Al-Khalil, the map calls it Hebron, sorry about that. On the right side, Al-Khalil, even though it's a dense Palestinian area that's been built up over many years, as you can see, Al-Khalil actually has a settlement in it. It's called Kiryat Arba, and it's like one of the centers of settler terrorism in the West Bank. It's the home of Baruch Goldstein, the guy who
shot up the masjid.
Yeah,
right?
the guy who shot up Ibrahimi Masjid and was taken care of by the crowd. Area A, which a lot of Al-Khalil is the one place the Palestinians in a very specific. It's one place in the West Bank that the Palestinians, in a very specific, narrow sense, are quote unquote free.
If the sisters in the back, please, akhawat, sisters in the back, please, sisters in the back. Assalamu alaikum, sisters in the back. If you could quiet down, please, jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much.
So it's the one place, the one designation where they're sort of very, in a strict, narrow sense, free of Israel in certain respects. It's administered and secured by the Palestinian Authority, which unfortunately is a security subcontractor for Israel. It coordinates with it. It receives funding from Israel. It depends on it to exist. It is ruled by, next slide please. It is ruled by Mahmoud Abbas, who again I will not sully the masjid with his. Can you go to the next slide please? There has been no election for almost 2 decades. His popularity is in the gutter. Nonetheless, he remains in power. His government is strong enough to exert control over some areas of Area A, strong enough to ward off total collapse from municipal services. I mean, some parts of the West Bank are quite nice, even this area in Area A. They are. But
nice in what sense?
Materially nice. There was a video of the opening of the Ramallah Mall.
Yeah.
I think. When was that? Was that like this year or last year?
I think it was in the last year. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see it's like some parts of the West Bank are very wealthy and pretty well off. However, and this is definitely the case, especially since what was called Operation Defensive Shield in 2002. None of these places are free from the IDF. The IDF can go anywhere it wants and do anything it wants in the West Bank. There was a point during within the last year where the IDF actually carried out operation a block from Mahmoud Abbas's presidential palace, like a block. And the division of power and responsibility the Oslo Accords proposed has collapsed. The authority is honestly just mostly Palestinians acting like the IDF and trying to carve out a space where they can govern themselves, but it's just this is not going to work. And I think everyone at this point knows what's going to work, except for Mahmoud Abbas and whoever is still listening to him. They're just like, if you know like the internet, it's how he's like his entire office should be Fell for It Again awards. At this point, a lot of Israeli officials are ready to dispense with the pretense. Next slide, please. This is a map of Bezalel Smotrich's decisive plan, quote unquote, to end the conflict, which grows out of Mordecai Kedar's plan to end the conflict, quote unquote. And it basically says we're going to annex everything except these little 6 places. And these 6 places will be ruled by tribal shuyukh, like, tribal elders, quote unquote, because of course, it's Arab, so they have tribal elders and, they ride camels and, because, that's how they think. It really is how they think. And that's the mechanism. Break up the West Bank into a bunch of these little pseudo city-states surrounded by settlers, totally economically dependent on Israel. Palestinians as helots, cheap labor, and Palestine is the most captive market that has ever existed. Permanent underclass. And this, like the idea of like Palestinians as permanent underclass and source of cheap labor, which was the case up until the Intifada, this leads into what I call the Israeli-American strategy of de-development.
What do you mean by de-development?
Well, if you put D in front of something, it means the opposite of it.
That's true.
So
I meant like explain it further for people who don't understand prefixes like me.
Yes, okay. So this is, when you see on the next slide, slide 26, is development. In the year 2000, that's what that area of Singapore looked like. And now that's what that area of Singapore looks like. That's development. Development is about improving living standards through increasing national income and economic growth. And this happens in a lot of ways, building proper infrastructure, constructing industries, making trade deals and so forth, all of that stuff. The stuff Donald Trump wants to talk about. Deals, deals, deals. Development is a raison d'etre, a reason that the Leviathan of the modern state exists. You need a very powerful state as a guarantor of the rights and standards to ensure there's no funny business, to ensure that this can even take place. And this goes in hand with what we talked about in Lecture 1 about how there's a relationship between modernity and economics and the state.
The structure of the modern state.
Yes, but the strategy of Israel and increasingly America in dealing with Israel's neighbors and in fact at this point in dealing with almost everywhere all around the world is to ensure that this is impossible. The national political economy of Israel, which is to say like the way in which the state uses politics and economics, how those things intertwine, is it seeks to be like a highly developed rich country, but it has like a lot of disadvantages. It doesn't have a lot of natural resources, but it does have a decent concentration of what some people call human capital and a lot of liquid capital as well because of their extraordinary amounts of external funding and their focus on education and through their early establishment of modern universities. Slide 27, please. These are two of the logos of the modern University of Israel. The one on the left is called the Technion, and the one on the right is the logo of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which was established by the orders of Chaim Weizmann. And because of that, it has a great dependence on high tech and on the war industry, to be frank. The war industry accounts for around 300,000 jobs in Israel, which is a huge percentage of the workforce. It's not that many people. And the high-tech industry is leaned on in part to overcome their disadvantages because it's a mobile industry. It just needs like a reliable supplies of things like electricity and internet infrastructure, which they have. And when it comes to foreign policy, and I understand it seems like I've gone on a digression, but this is related to how they deal with the West Bank and Gaza. So Israel seeks two options for everyone in the region. And either they're tied to it as tightly as possible, and that's only increased with the Abraham Accords, which everyone will remember, I hope, that were signed during Donald Trump's first term, and were basically just a way of bypassing the Palestinian question, quote unquote, and just having out-of-states make deals directly with Israel and declare peace.
So which countries have signed the Abraham Accords so far?
The UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, which other ones? Obviously, the Egypt and Jordan already had those.
They don't need to sign.
Yeah, they don't need to sign. They were already there. But I know it was the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. There was like two other ones.
And this is an agreement for?
It's agreement to normalize relations. Trade relations, bilateral relations, all of that. And part of now that those countries have signed those agreements with them, those countries are now becoming reliant on Israeli spying technology to repress their people.
Which works both ways for sure.
Yeah, it does. It works very well. And countries like Jordan and Egypt depend on water from Israel and gas from Israel. That's how deep it goes. And the other option for governments that are not in these accords is destruction and ruin.
So you're bringing up the foreign policy.
Slide 29, please.
It's the same policy within.
Yeah, the foreign policy is the same as the internal policy. You can have destruction and ruin like Gaza, or you can make a little money for yourself, like in some parts of the West Bank.
Like the Palestinian
On the left,
Authority.
on the left side, this is an image of someone in the UAE using Israeli spying technology. On the right side, this is people in Lebanon who have to use private diesel generators in order to generate enough electricity because of destruction and chaos and disorder that Israel tends to cause. And this exact also additionally one part of de-development is making sure there's no strong central stable government, and that is important because in so much as there's no strong central government, then you can't exert control. This gives Israel like an official excuse to like, okay, we're going to invade because the central government, which we undermined and destroyed and de-developed, can't deal with the parastate militia like the Hezbollah or like any other one, because we've given them a space to operate in. So this strategy is used also with the West Bank and with Gaza. Break them up into little cantons, make them unable to rely on one another for their economic needs, make sure they're captive markets for Israeli goods. People might remember the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, quote unquote. If you've seen photos of the aid, a lot of it is Israeli products. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation would have had to have purchased those products from Israel and then given them to people in Gaza, and as part of their death trap strategy to kill people, that they're also still enriching Israelis off of that process. And this applies, frankly, even in like the recognized borders of Israel. Let's see, which slide is this? Go to slide 31. So on the left side, this is Carmiel. That's a city in the Galilee. It is a Jewish city. On the right side is Sakhnin. That is a predominantly Palestinian Arab city, 48 Palestinians. And so an interesting thing about the Israeli strategy of development internally is they have what's called employment areas. So a city is allocated like an area outside the city proper, but that like they can build infrastructure for and invite companies there to basically like set up factories or offices or outposts.
It's like it's terrain, or it's municipality or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a municipal terrain designation of places that are not inside the city, but it's like an employment area so that people can live closer to their cities, because they have a problem with people like only having jobs in Tel Aviv in the area, so they wanted to try to like disperse it. But these areas are allocated by the government, and so Carmiel gets 550 dunams, which is I can't divide by 4, but if you could divide by 4, you could figure out how many acres that would be. Now, guess how many dunams Sakhnin gets?
Same size?
No.
Same size cities, I mean?
Yeah, it's roughly the same size, and they're in roughly the same area.
Compared to 550, I'd say 10%, they get 50.
No. Almost 1%, 5 dunams. That's barely more than an acre for their developmental area.
So to ensure their economy never grows.
Yeah, to ensure that there's no like parallel economy, that even if like Palestinian Arabs who live within Israel want to build economic power for their community, they can't possibly do it. And of course, this applies even more in Gaza. Slide 32, please. So Gaza used to have a thriving sector for strawberries. Jabalia in particular was known for strawberries. However, all exports had to be permitted by the Israeli authorities. And of course, agriculture exports are time sensitive. If you have a truckload of ripe strawberries, they have to be shipped immediately. So all that Israel had to do was, to ensure that there was no external market for their strawberries, was delay. Oh, you missed this paperwork. Oh, it's too late. The office closed. Oh, your strawberries rotted. I'm so sorry. That wasn't on purpose. Next time, okay? So, as a result, that didn't work out. In contrast, the sector of the Palestinians, which collaborates with Israel, does well for itself. Next slide. Example. This is not the normal example, but this is the house of a Palestinian businessman named Mahmoud Abdul Hadi.
In Palestine?
Yeah. It's rather nice.
Pretty.
I'm sure the property taxes are pretty ruinous, but so Palestinians who collaborate with Israel, the sector of those people, they can do well for themselves as individuals, but this doesn't translate into some sort of like national developmental strategy or anything like that. The people who are doing that are part of the comprador class. They're the people who are out for that reason, to do that thing. We want to enrich ourselves. Here's a way we can do it. At this point, that's what they are. And that Israel also seeks to make that kind of development impossible. How do you make a high-tech industry when you don't have reliable power, reliable water, or reliable internet, and all that's controlled by the enemy? How can you develop industrially if all your imports are inspected by Israel and then can be blocked at any time and for any reason? The power that Israel has over the Palestinian areas shapes their economy in ruinous ways. It permits them to do things that are beneficial to them. So a lot of Palestinian workers who work in the West Bank actually work to construct settlements. Or in Israel proper, they work in construction. And it ends up with this class of collaborator oligarchs who subcontract for the state to enforce their laws upon Palestinians. Next slide, please. So the state of the West Bank exemplifies the concept of rule by law. You've probably heard of rule of law, like the idea of the rule of law, that the law is like a neutral entity that applies to everyone and nobody is above the law. In the West Bank, what you have is rule by law, which I think is best exemplified by this quote by a South American dictator, for my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law. A recent video by a settler organization puts forth the idea that the olive trees of the West Bank, like I mentioned to you, were planted by Hamas for the purpose of attacks on settlements, and thus they are, quote, terrorist property, and that's no problem with destroying them. And Smotrich famously stated at a meeting about land registration in the West Bank that they can, quote, make the result come out how we like. Meaning that, like, even if, like, you technically have title to your land, they can figure out a way to make it legally, they put some quasi-legalese out that makes it sound like actually you don't have title to your land. We do. The law in the books is not the true law. The law is how it is exercised. The law as it lives is the true law. And equality before the neutral law is a dead concept in the West Bank, in Gaza, and frankly in the entire world. All that remains at this point is the funeral. Next slide.
If it was alive to begin with.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So there are worlds beyond this to get into. There are gulfs beneath gulfs, as my father, rahimahullah, might have said. There are the Musta'arabim, who ape Palestinianness to spy for Israel. There's the Mossad and its terrorism. There's the surveillance industrial complex that records literally every phone call, made by Ahl al-Gaza. Every single phone call. The left side is a TV show which is very popular in Israel, and it dramatizes the Musta'arabim who pretend to be Arabs, and it makes like a whole like prestige television thing. If I may, I'll leave you with a brief caution. It is tempting to think that Gaza is the dawn of a new age where people can hold governments accountable and we can push through this in order to build that world. I do not think this is a commonly held view in this room, but I think what is more immediately consequential is the lesson that the leaders of governments take from Gaza, as opposed to the lesson we take. I don't know if you can go to the next slide, and I don't know if you click through, we'll be able to play. Can you go 2 forward and see if you can play that clip, if that comes up? Does it come up? It doesn't. Ah, there you go. Yeah. No, not that. Go back. There you go.
Can you click that?
Can you click that and like go to the thing? Okay, let's see if this works. This is a speech by Abiy Ahmed.
Do you know if sound works?
It doesn't matter if it's an Amharic, so it doesn't matter if sound works. But
I wanna hear
basically,
the
this is a speech that Abiy Ahmed made in his parliament. If the war starts, the result is clear. There's no crying after that. How can someone look at Ukraine and Palestine and talk about getting help? No one is going to die for you. We saw that wars won't stop through protests. Once we get into war, the result is clear. We will have reliable force, and no one will stop us. Nobel Peace Prize winner, everybody.
Oh, he won a Nobel Peace Prize?
Yeah, he won a Nobel Peace Prize. Then he did one attempt at genocide, and this is going to be his second attempt at a genocide.
Post-Peace Prize.
Yes. You have to get your Peace Prize first, and then you can do your genocides. Everyone knows that.
That's the way the world works today.
Yep. Next slide, please. This is the lesson that leaders are taking. Will we soon see some taking another? It's not likely in my view. People are more likely to take lessons from Israel, whose military-industrial complex has jumped tremendously in value since the genocide began. I actually looked into this. So this is Eghbert Systems. This is one of the most reliable Israeli genocide companies that manufactures weapons and drones and all those other fun things. They also have children's coloring books, by the way. So I looked into it. I was like, if I bought, say, $10,000 in their stock on October 1st, how much more money would I have today? And when I looked into it, it has gone up in value 64%.
So you'd have $16,400.
Oh, you can do math.
I told you I could do math. You made fun of me earlier, but
64% return in 2 years on this stock. And this is a genocide stock.
And Eghbert does what exactly?
They manufacture weapons.
Weapons,
for
straightforward.
For the Israeli government. Yes, there's no like little like, oh well, maybe they manufacture weapons for the Israeli government and for Morocco and for other countries.
There's some people who invest in these things till today, Muslims, and they see the money and they're blind, they're soulless. As surprising it may sound.
That's too nice a word to use. You need to use a less nice word. So, if I leave you with anything, is that Israel is a country for whom security or imagined security can justify any atrocity: murder, sexual assault, torture, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Control is the state language of security-mad Israel. It is born in blood and fire in a region that rejected the idea that people from somewhere else could destroy the civilization that had endured, erase its people, and build atop it something new. But it stands yet, and that is our failure. It may stand another 100 years, or more, or yet more. Written though the future is, nobody knows what's written in it. Someday we must turn this around, but unfortunately it will not be today. We have a duty to meditate on what we can do to scrawl any mark on the edifice of Zionism. Its foot shall slide, if I may quote a famous pastor, its foot shall slide in due time, if only we can figure out how to push.
What was he talking about?
Let's go back 2 slides. It's a famous sermon by an early American pastor, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, by Jonathan Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't use that, don't use some of the stuff.
I might.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I'm going to poach a lot of this material, plagiarize a lot of it. But subhanAllah, like, I was...
that terminates the lecture.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khairan. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that brought us here to the end of this this series, this limited series that we had, exposing the structure and the history and the reality of Zionism. And, when you, especially these last two, with the lobbying and now with the internal repression against the Palestinians in their own society, it's very easy for a lot of people to feel overwhelmed, to feel powerless, to feel, okay, just like you said, you put it as in, what can you do to scrawl any mark on the edifice of Zionism? Like, just make a mark. But some people, to them, it's very disheartening to hear, just to hear that it's an edifice, to hear that it's such a big structure that's so seemingly immovable. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Say, truth has come and falsehood has perished, because falsehood by its very nature is bound to perish. Falsehood, what does it do? It perishes. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it doesn't have legs, it doesn't have a structure. So as big as it may look, as expensive, as limitless, quote unquote, that the resource, because there's no limited resource, but as they may seem, Eghbert goes up 64% in 2 years, unheard of, absolutely unheard of in the financial world. Doesn't matter. All of that is a house of cards. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. So this pastor, as much as, who knows what he was talking about and where he was coming from, what his aqidah was, but he's spot on. Its foot shall slide in due time, if only we could figure out how to push. That's ultimately true. And subhanAllah, I was in Sheikh Hatem today in his class about hadith. It was in the chapter of making dua. And one of the du'as was, or one of the hadith in Al-Adab Mufrad, the collection of Bukhari that we went over, was where the Prophet ﷺ taught us to say, just one second, let me get to it. He taught us to say in our supplication, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for well-being in this world and the hereafter, and then to ask Him to take vengeance on your behalf. And this isn't to promote powerlessness or acceptance of evil or pessimism. Can't find the exact thought now, but it is to actually do the opposite. Because a lot of times people hear a hadith like this and say, okay, I'm supposed to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time for well-being, then ask Him to take vengeance for me because I feel powerless or unable to. But that's not to promote that I'll just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fix the situation. Part of the reason of making that dua is that if you feel powerless now, you're just relaying it to the ultimate power that never fails. That's number one. So it gives you agency. It gives you agency where, like, okay, I feel powerless. I see all of this. Can I change all of this, as you said? Definitely not in one day. Definitely not immediately. That could lead to powerlessness and pessimism. So right away I turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, you take vengeance for me. It's agency that allows me to escape that powerlessness, at least immediately. That's number one. Number two is that it also reminds me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And that with that reminder, I know that when He's in control, how does He do things? Do people just wake up one day and they learned what they didn't know before? Do people wake up one day and something that was in their way is now just gone, it dissolved? That's not how Allah does things. It's not how He ever does things. He does it through people, through systems, right? So any type of dua that we make, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do this for me, there is no instruction or tradition that the next step is to say, where is it now, right? All of our tradition is that you're supposed to get moving. So that's how I view all this, and I know I've shared it before, but super important to revisit, because always in the conclusion that seems to linger where you can't do anything, and that's not true. So I just always want to bring that back, especially here at the conclusion of this series. And this by itself was one such thing, right? Us trying to scratch that edifice. I educated tens of people, maybe 100-something people with the online about this, something they didn't know before. And then we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, only I don't mean to say that you can't do anything, but only that you must plant trees. And wherever an orchard grows, once there was nothing.
I think that is so powerful. Yeah. The tree example specifically, because we have our own version of that. What's our version of that? What's the Islamic version of what you just said? You just said plant. Say it again.
You must plant trees where every orchard stands.
There was once nothing.
There was once nothing.
You see an orchard in front of you and there's once nothing. Is there an Islamic version of that?
This is you getting back at me for the D thing.
You made fun of me about not knowing math.
Okay,
like you've roasted me a couple of times.
Okay, fair enough.
But this isn't a roast. It's an honest question for everybody.
Is it like the hadith, like that if the day of judgment comes
there you go. So you got it. So I couldn't even stump you. You're the man, inshallah. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if the day of judgment starts and in one of your hands is a fasila, a seed, then plant it. But the day of judgment is starting. Me putting this tree in the seed in the ground, what will happen? What will benefit? Nothing. It will go absolutely nowhere. And not only is it a seed, a fasila is a seed of a palm tree. Palm trees sprout in like 3 to 5 years. So it's not even a regular tree that you gotta wait one season. No, it'll sprout, but you won't get any fruit that can be sold or benefit from for 3 to 5 years. The day of judgment is right now. So talk about being productive, being proactive, and being optimistic. But especially in the case of Zionism, case of the Palestinian issue, you see all these images, you hear all this that you mentioned, and you learn it, and you get enraged, and the answer might be, what role are you playing to free Palestine, as you said, in 100 years? And if that discourages you from action, then that's insincerity. You're not sincere. You're not doing it for Allah. You're not doing it for the ummah. Because the when shouldn't bother you. The how shouldn't bother you. It's like, what can I do? So if Allah determined, I don't like it, but I'll accept it because Allah said so. If He determined that my role is to teach the parent of the child that will begin the movement, I'll take it. That's an honor. If that's what we did here. And if it's to teach the person who will lead the movement, that's great. If we'll be the ones I'll take any of it. But if it's to teach the grandparent of the child who will lead the movement, that's acceptable as well. Because Allah determines these things. And we just do our part. So Jazakallah khairan again, Haroun, for taking out the time. If you have any closing remarks or closing thoughts, anyone has closing questions, feel free, inshallah. We're over by 5 minutes. We end at 6:30. The brothers, you start at 7 sharp, or are we taking your time now? When do you guys usually start? 6:30? After Maghrib? Oh no, I thought it was 7. We've been blabbing this whole time. They're sitting so polite. Astaghfirullah azim. I am so sorry. I thought it was 7 o'clock. No. This is bad manners on my part. I'm so sorry. Astaghfirullah azim. Please forgive us. We thought that you guys begin at 7. I apologize. Please forgive me, brothers and sisters. Jazakallah Haroun. I'm gonna have to kick you out. Subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our community, our Uzbek community, for their patience. I apologize dearly. I really didn't intend to take your time. I thought it was 7 start.
This is entirely his fault.
I was like, they came early. They want to hang out with us. I was like, no, this is astaghfirullah. I ask your forgiveness and jazakumullah khair for your patience.